And Dan, I think when you were talking about are we really exceptional entrepreneurs in Ireland, I think Glen Dimplex might be the example that you were searching for exceptional entrepreneurs. But it was something very interesting, Dan, that you did say about 90% of our exports coming from foreign-owned companies. But how much of it is down to the fact that the really successful Irish companies expand overseas? One example I can think of, and we heard there from Sean about Glen Dimplex, and we heard about how it has set up research and development in other countries, is great companies like the Kerry Group, for example, have been innovators in food ingredients. But as a company grows, an Irish company grows, it just doesn't do it from Ireland. It does it from locations all over the world. And that's something that perhaps we should be celebrating.
Yeah, you know, it's one of the things with a small economy that almost necessarily that as a company grows, if it is successful, it's going to internationalize and more of its business is going to be outside. Like I suppose CRH is the ultimate example of that its footprint here is actually quite small, but it's a huge company. But, you know, ultimately, the jobs that our CRH does have here are very well paid, are good jobs. Now, you know, the fact that most of its business is abroad is a good thing. It's not so good that, you know, many of the functions move abroad as well. But really, what other choice is there?
Well, is there an opportunity for government to bring people back? I mean, I mentioned the Kerry Group because recently it has announced that its new major research and development facility is going to be in Kildare. Now, I know there's an awful lot of Kerry men are very surprised that it's going to be in Kildare because that might as well be a foreign country as well as having it somewhere else. But what can we do perhaps to encourage Irish companies as they expand and grow internationally to locate their research and development here in Ireland?
Well, I think it just comes down to making sure that the general business environment is as good as it possibly can be, whether it's for Irish companies or foreign companies coming in here. But I would be careful about the idea of government in some way, you know, discouraging Irish companies from internationalizing. If a company, you know, whether it's Sean's company or Kerry, feels that its investment should be abroad in the best interests of its business, I certainly don't think it's the role of government to try and prevent that. So I think we just need to be careful.
I'm not talking about preventing. If I could maybe hand the microphone over to Sean, please, because it's the whole thing about encouragement, because perhaps there is a perception at times that Irish government encourages foreign multinationals to locate here, but is perhaps not as encouraging of Irish companies to do their international expansion from Ireland. Do you think is that a fair criticism?
No, I don't, Matt, really. I suppose if I look back, if Glen Dimplex was an Irish business, just solely an Irish business, the reality is we mightn't be in existence today after what went on, you know, in Ireland over a decade. And like the resources that we've invested in our Irish operations over the last 3 years, like don't forget the fact that those resources came from our overseas activities and the profits that we generated overseas. So any good business, you know, has to spread its risk. So you have to go further afield. It's like a fisherman. You know, you go where the fish are. You go for where the opportunities are. We're actually great believers in decentralized R&D. Now, you know, people said to us for a long time we were crazy, but our R&D is decentralized all over the world because the business we're in is not a homogenous worldwide business. So we're actually creating products for the individual markets. Now, I think food is maybe slightly different, or ingredients is slightly different. I mean, one of the areas where I would certainly like to see, more work done, and I know we've had we're in discussions and have just signed a non-disclosure confidentiality agreement with US foreign direct investment in Ireland. I'd like to see more link up between Indigenous Irish industry and foreign direct investment in Ireland. And I think there are opportunities where we're not leveraging enough jointly off of that.
Now, Niall, there's something I want to ask you about. You made a big statement, I think, in the middle of your presentation. I wrote it down. The classroom as a way for learning is dead. You better elaborate upon that, because I'm sure there are lots of teachers out there who think that the reason that there's some fantastic projects, and I think it's because of the work that they've put in teaching these kids and encouraging them to produce the various projects that are outside?
Yeah, probably comes from the fact that I wasn't particularly good in the classroom myself, so I was probably saying it from a very personal perspective. But I think when I look at how I learn and how I learn effectively, particularly with something like sustainability, where there are maybe 1,000 people in the world who are very, in tune with the nexus issues like, energy that Sean is talking about, or the food issues that, Kerry Group and Glanbia and so on are growing on the back of. And to actually be in tune, with the different people in those organizations who are facing those challenges on a daily basis, and using social media to tell their stories and to engage with that network in a way where no curriculum can keep up. So I think the world is changing so fast that by the time, my father used to write French books for French, so Joe Dunne is my dad, and he would have written Le Français Oral and all of these books. But the amount of time Dad, when we went into the Euro, Dad redid Le Français Oral and all of the books to kind of have the Euro as opposed to the punt. And I really empathize with teachers now who are trying to write books and set curriculums around the issues that we're facing and try and keep those books current. And I think the only way we can actually do that is actually by using networks. And when I look at where that could potentially go, because the expertise sits with very few, but yet we need it to be with so many. I mean, just looking at the Young Scientists exhibition, it's built around 20 teachers. 20 teachers have contributed to more awards here than anybody else. So actually trying to get those experts access to broader resource is the challenge. And doing that through networks will be way more effective than doing it in a classroom where you're confined to 30 or 35 students. Apply that to MIT. An expert in economics in MIT or sustainable development in MIT, now through networks is able to reach kind of 10,000 people or even 100,000 people all around the world and disseminate content and also set projects, things like Coder Dojo and Raspberry Pi. They're movements that are network based where kids are being empowered with these devices and they are coming up with the solutions themselves. They're sharing their ideas through the networks and they're learning in a completely different and for me personally much more effective fashion than I ever learned in the classroom.
Well, can I ask you, Sean and Dan, what you think of this, the potential for this, for learning this way? Because we do have a very traditional structure of learning in Ireland. Do we need to be changing the way that we teach or require children to innovate in the way of asking questions in school rather than working to a set curriculum? Sean?
I'll answer that question, I suppose, in reverse. I always say to my colleagues that the two single biggest skills in business, number one is to listen, and number two is to ask the obvious question to you and never be afraid to ask the obvious question. But if you ask the question, go back to number one. No point in asking the question unless you're prepared to listen. And I have 4 children who have gone through the education system. And certainly, I would say, of the 3, primary, secondary, university, I would say 3 very different experiences. I think our primary education system is good. It's not world class, but then none of our education system, contrary to what we'd like to tell ourselves, is world class. I think university is just a learning experience. It's not just educational, it's part of your growing up. And I think that's a good system. I think our secondary system is, in approaching crisis. It's learning by rote. It doesn't encourage the imagination that we've talked about or the creativity we talked about. It's cramming. It's learning off the answers to the question before the question is even asked.
Yeah, no,
Dan?
I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay. Can I put it open to the floor? Because I don't want to be asking all the questions here. There's plenty of people here I know who have interests in all the areas that the lads have been talking about. And I can't believe, although it's early in the morning, that you would all be so shy as not to have any questions to ask. Come on now, if it was a room full of the students outside, there might be a bit of shyness about asking a question, but I'm sure there are some people here who must have questions to ask. At the front, thank you.
It's a question for Dan, I suppose. Dan, you talked about our position in the world of entrepreneurs. I suppose we could elaborate what you mean by entrepreneurs, because I think people who work for the multinational brand are entrepreneurs also in their own right, but not necessarily business owners in the business.
Sure, yeah. Well, I think there's a difference between, obviously, a corporate executive and somebody who starts their own business or runs their own business. And I think people tend to be very different. The mindset, somebody who is an entrepreneur values that independence, running their own organization, as opposed to somebody who is good within a bigger organization, who's able to negotiate all of the difficulties of within a management structure. There are different sets of skills. It always strikes me that, and having lived abroad and watched Irish people work in organizations abroad, that Irish people are good at that. They're good at working within organizations. I don't think we're that good at the creative side of being entrepreneurs, of starting businesses and being successful. And there are quite a lot of metrics pointing in that way. And clearly, the one that I focused on, which I think is the most relevant one, is just that very low level of Irish companies exporting. And that is despite really having all of the benefits and all of the reasons to be able to do that. In terms of single market access, part of a large currency, English language, links to the US, links to Europe, access to the UK market on our doorstep. There are just so many reasons why our companies should have more penetration of foreign markets. So it's to my mind, I think it's very clear that there is a problem there.
Dan, can I ask you, maybe that may suggest that instead of concentrating on creating entrepreneurs, which sort of suggests business owners and business developers, that we should be encouraging innovation in products and services, out of which the business models can then come.
Yeah, that certainly. But one of the things about employment creation is that what you generally find that additional employment in advanced economies comes from new companies. The companies that already exist at a given time tend to be churning. Some of them are growing, some of them are decreasing employment. But the additional employment that comes from new businesses. And that's why it's so important that you get a higher startup rate, both for prosperity and also employment.
Sean, can I ask you, in your company, how much do you encourage individuals to come forward with ideas to innovate, that it can come from anywhere within the organisation, as somebody has a new idea for a storage heater or whatever it is?
Matt, could I just go back to the previous question for one moment? I think the bigger the bigger issue, rather than just ideas, is Irish start-up businesses in Ireland have a tendency to sell out too quickly. That, to me, is the biggest issue. So let me go back to the fund that I talked about, the Enterprise Ireland Fund, the Scaling Up Fund. Enterprise Ireland actually have 4 different funds. There's one of them is seed capital. And of the 4 funds, the one that we decided to invest in was the Scaling Fund, because we think that is the issue. And I suspect I have read a half a dozen times in the last 3 years headlines in Dan's own paper even, such and such a business sold for 20 million. And that's the headline. Very positive news in one sense. But to me, it's completely negative news, because we're actually selling the business and the technology and the ideas out of the country. Now, to go back to your specific question, we're great believers in decentralized R&D. So we have 26 R&D facilities around the world. And that ran contrary to the corporate speak for a decade and a half, which was all about centralized R&D, big, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry. That hasn't worked for them. And they're now beginning to break them up and get them back into chunk sizes. So we're great believers in having R&D localized, local to the production facilities. And our R&D is a combination of creative marketing product people coming forward with ideas, working with the engineers to develop the concepts. But a fundamental part of it also is involving our customers. So when we have customers coming to visit our showrooms, we will bring them around our R&D facilities, and we will engage them in what we're doing, because we learn from that. You ask the question and you learn. So we have 26, what I would like to think, are very, very creative, highly incentivized, highly encouraged, highly positive R&D facilities around the world that are, as I'm sitting here spoofing, are doing something positive.
Do we have more questions from the floor, please? Here, thank you.
I think it's a combination of the two. To take the two companies you mentioned, they're hugely supportive of what we're doing, and have been working with us for the last 2.5 years. So nothing negative from that point of view. But if I look at the bigger power companies worldwide, of course it's a threat to them. If you look at the banking system around the world, a big part of the profits that banks made are holding your money and my money overnight. And it's far more significant than most people could even contemplate. It's a big part of their income, but they wouldn't want you to know about it. It's exactly the same with the large utility sectors worldwide. There are hidden areas of inefficiencies, hidden areas of fat. But that's what happened to the telecommunications industry. It got turned on its head. And very, very interestingly, the largest electricity utility company in Europe is E.ON. It's number 6 in the world. And because of the scale of renewables that's coming on in its primary market in Germany, particularly from photovoltaic, E.ON in October pulled all of the forecasts that they had given to the markets for the next 3 years. They pulled them because they said their business model had been turned on its head, and they will not be issuing any guidance to the market until the middle of this year. So that is the disruptive factor that's there. Go back to the point I made. Most people don't like change. The utility industry is no different. Do you want to be a Kodak? Kodak had digital technology before anybody in the world had it. But their big income stream was from selling you and I, the film. And they put it in the deep freeze until the deep freeze froze over. And they're out of business.
Gentleman there.
I have to say, and I'm on public record as saying this, I fundamentally disagreed with the Smart Economy document that was published in 2009. It was cobbled together over a 2-week period for political reasons. We all can't work in the smart economy. There aren't enough jobs there for a start. We can't be selective. Again, I'm only repeating what I've said before. We need every type of job of every description, whether it's cleaning bedrooms in hotels, waiting in restaurants. We need every type of a job. Our economy, the Celtic Tiger was a charade. 21% of our economy was tied up in construction. The long-run average in an OECD country is about 9%. So we hid structural problems in our economy during the Celtic Tiger. So go back to first principles. We need every type of job. Now, I listened to what the Commissioner said this morning about low-cost manufacturing in Europe is over. I fundamentally disagree with her. And if she was here, I would say the same to her. And I'm positive on that for the following reasons. The tide has turned. Labour rates in China are going up by 15% a year. And that has happened now for the last 4 years, and it continues. China unleashed deflation over the world for a decade and a half. That's over. If I look at Ireland, we were 30% off the pace back in 2008. I think that's probably under 10% at the moment. So if we stick the course for the next number of years, and you take into account the impact of compound interest on the one side when something is going up, and you can contain your cost or freeze your costs on the other side, over a period of 5 to 7 years, a lot can be achieved. That's what happened in Germany. That's what happened in Germany between 2003 and 2010. Over that period, they inflated their economy at the inflation rate effectively of the EU. We inflated our economy at 4 times that, and we're paying the price for it today. So I believe, in fact, I have no doubt, and I'd like to think we're demonstrating that up in Dunleer. We can get back into the game. Now, I'm not talking about, for €1 an hour, but markets are converging again, and the tide has turned.
Do we have more questions from the audience, please? Gentleman back there. Sorry, excuse me, would you mind maybe just standing up so we can all hear you in the room? I think it's a bit difficult for people. Now there's a challenge for you, Dan, as both a journalist and an economist, to be positive.
I'm not as upbeat as Sean, but I certainly think that things domestically here, there are clearly signs in some areas that either a bottom has been hit, particularly the residential property market. I think there are the best signs we've seen of an end to the decline in residential property prices and having a stable property market, a well-functioning property market. Nobody wants to go back to the lunacy of the past, but that would be a very important element of recovery, and I think there is the best evidence yet of that. In other areas as well, there are certainly signs of progress, and I think even in the past weeks, we were just saying this earlier on, that there does seem to have been a change in sentiment, that people just, the surveys are showing it as well, and anecdotally, you do get the sense that there is a more positive, people at both business and consumers are feeling more positive, and that is in itself important because confidence, we know, it's not all about confidence, but confidence is certainly an important element with things. In Europe, I'd certainly be, one area that hasn't come up is the issue of Southern Europe, and Southern Europe is in real trouble, and that division between North and South is widening. The recession in Europe in general may have bottomed out, but certainly in Italy and Spain, things are deteriorating at a very alarming pace, and that is something that is a real cause for concern. A widening of that north-south gap in Europe will eventually, if it doesn't stop, will eventually tear the euro apart. So that's a big worry. But as Sean said, the US, for example, is really, last year was for the first time since 2007-8, it's showing signs of a self-sustaining recovery, and clearly that's extremely important for us. So there are, a lot of there are a huge number of indicators at any given time, and I think there are more sustainably positive things in the domestic economy than there have been since the crash. And as you mentioned, that almost miraculous, it was exactly this time last year that a Dutch economist was over here from Citibank saying absolutely no way could Ireland re-enter the bond market. It would have to have a second bailout, to the point, and he created so much controversy that eventually the Taoiseach had to comment on it. And clearly there is now a good chance of exiting the bailout on schedule, and certainly the re-entry of the bond market has been better than anybody could have anticipated. So that again is another strong positive. But I think things are still very fragile. The scale of the recession depression that we had is something that one doesn't move out of easily. Those kind of recessions, those balance sheet recessions, take a long time to work out.
Okay, Niall, if you could take the microphone, please, because you mentioned another phrase you used in your presentation was about that the Earth had gone through 5 mass extinction events. Now, we dodged the main bullet on the 21st of December. Maybe that accounts for the boost in retail spending that everybody was celebrating that the world hadn't come to an end. But how fearful are you that because of the way we live our lives, and particularly our consumption of energy and the non-sustainable way that we go for growth, that we could have, if not a mass extinction event, major problems for the world, for the sustainability of human life on this world?
I think quite worried. You have days where the science can really get in on top of you. I mean, just to without going into too much technicality.
Oh, that's okay. It's the science and technology fair, so we can do the science and technology bit.
But there are things called forcings and thresholds within nature. So there are natural cycles to everything. There are natural cycles around carbon, and the oceans are actually the lungs of the planet as opposed to the rainforest and things like that. So we have really started to tinker with nature, and I think the headlines tend to go for deforestation because it's a very tangible thing, and people can kind of see how it impacts on communities and indigenous people, and it's something we can kind of really rally to. However, the oceans are also being contaminated by pollution. You've got 5 gyres of largely plastic waste that some of the gyres are the size of Texas floating around in the Pacific and so on. So you've 40,000 pieces of plastic per square kilometre in the world's oceans, and all of that is adding to the acidification of the oceans and their ability to actually do their natural job, which is just to be the lungs of the planet and to kind of clean the atmosphere. We can only tinker with those things so much before you get into what's called clat rate gun scenarios, which is, we get into the realm of unpredictability, where we know it's going to be bad, but we don't know how bad it's going to be. Why? Because we don't have the data. And the last time we had the data, we're going back millions of years to look at, these kind of mass extinction events. Things like the permafrost melting in Siberia. If we go beyond 2 degrees, you get into situations where all of Siberia is covered in permafrost, and there's methane in that permafrost, and as a greenhouse gas, methane is about 20 times more potent in terms of its greenhouse gas properties than carbon, and you'd have the same with coral. So the ability, once we go over 2 degrees in terms of warming on the planet, for that methane to be released and to get into a scenario where we actually don't know what's going to happen is quite scary. And really, you can become fascinated by the terror that goes with that, or you can actually just say, well, we know about those things. And
But Niall, how much of a problem is it that perhaps for many people, because they want to be positive and they want to get on with their day-to-day living, that their eyes sort of glaze over a little bit at these predictions of possible doom, and that you find it very hard, maybe even within your own company and people similar to you in other companies, to get business leaders to take these issues seriously?
So I think you need a different language, and you need to be able to relate it to, the commercial integrity of business. So I think the way Sean approaches this, you don't hear Sean or other business leaders standing there talking about sustainability or eco or green. It's very much about the business case and how do we actually get to scale? How do we partner to achieve scale? That's the way people talk about it. So I think the great platform, the great gift that we have around this is our ability to kind of really solve these problems through business. Because business, I think, has that ability to tackle these things at pace and scale, and also sees the commercial opportunity involved with solving some of these problems. I firmly believe that the businesses that solve these issues will be the GEs and the Coca-Colas of tomorrow.
But something that's been noticeable, particularly during the economic depression in this country for the last 5 years, is how in public discourse the whole issue of green agenda has been lost. The whole issue has been very much pushed down the agenda. Has that happened internationally, and particularly in the corporate world as well? Has there been less of an emphasis in recent years than there would have been perhaps 5, 6, 7 years ago?
I think there was a bubble. So there were a lot of businesses who were doing a lot of marketing and talking about, particularly if you look at big oil, so the 4 largest oil companies in the world, when you look at how much they're talking about their clean tech portfolio versus how much on the R&D side they're spending on clean tech, it's completely disproportionate. They're still very much wedded to the 500 trillion in subsistence that they're getting around oil from governments all around the world to make sure that you and I don't have to see that when we pay for it at the pump or when we travel anywhere. So there's a huge incumbent machine protecting that subsistence. And I think that bubble kind of burst, and you've got businesses like Nike, Unilever, Glendimplex, and so on who have this built into the core of their business, have actually looked at this as a commercial opportunity. They are the businesses that have kind of started to take this into a whole other direction, and will continue to scale over the next couple of years.
Do we have more questions from the audience, please? Gentleman there.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that cop-on thing, the intangible in terms of the success of attracting foreign companies here, and it's something, again, having watched Irish people work in international organizations and places elsewhere, that just, I've always noticed, and I've only lived here for 2.5 years, but Irish people don't complain very much compared to other, I just, in London I wouldn't go to the water cooler because just people were whinging all the time. The Italians spend more time avoiding doing the work than actually just getting on and getting it done. We just have this sort of cop on, can do, let's get it done, and I think we're very good employees, and I think we're much better employees than we are entrepreneurs, and I certainly fully agree with you with that, on that.
Sean, do you want to take up that point?
All I'd say is that my late father used to always say, you can never buy common sense. And I think, that's what it's about. It's not rocket science, it's just basic common sense.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to Sean? In your piece, you talk about the fact that you've spread globally, but yet you're very much an Irish company and that you sell that. So what part of that are you selling? What do you think of that incredible value? What do people want to hear about Ireland?
If I were to list probably the 6 items that we're good at, that I think we're good at, in the 6 would be we understand cultures. And I'm not just speaking about language or the legal system. I'm just fundamentally talking about culture. And Dan has touched on it there. The French are very different to the Germans. The Italians are very different to the Greeks. The New Zealanders with the Australians are a bit like us with the English. So everywhere you go in the world, it's different. The cultures are different. I think we're good at that. And we have a fundamental point in our management philosophy of the management teams of our individual countries are run by nationals of those countries. So we do not superimpose foreigners into an environment that they don't understand. Like, with the best will in the world, even though we're the largest Irish company in Japan, I'll never understand the Japanese culture, ever. But I'll try to, but I leave it to others, to get us through it. Where the Irishness comes into it is that we're very proud of the fact that we're Irish. We make it very clear we're Irish owned, we're Irish headquartered. You won't see us doing extensive advertising or marketing campaigns around the world. But where we invest our money is bringing those people to Ireland. So I would say we probably have 30 senior Japanese visits to Ireland every year, maybe 20 German, 25 French, because we have them captive. And we look after them when they're here. So whether it's for a rugby international or horse racing, or they're playing a game of golf with a Des Smith, like we did with we do with the Japanese player in a Ryder Cup winning team. The Japanese are just like fascinated with golf. These are the little things that are there. We've a Japanese garden in Ireland, and every time we have a senior Japanese person coming, we have a tree planting ceremony. That links them into Ireland. They get a photograph every spring, every autumn of their tree. There's a plaque in front of it. This is your tree, and they then have competitions amongst themselves. Mine is growing faster than yours. But it's all little things. Now, call it detail or call it common sense. You can put whatever you want in the package, but it comes back to the same thing. It's taking the time and the attention to say, what is it that will link them into us and into Ireland? Again, the Japanese are fascinated, the Chinese are fascinated with Irish music. They can tell me about Irish musicians that I've never heard of. And it's putting them in a place where they can hear live these musicians. That's the kind of thing that we do. So it's good at understanding their cultures, knowing that you will never be part of that culture, but then also bringing part of our culture from Ireland to them. And that's how they know we're Irish.
That's a very positive note on which I think we've come to the end of our time, and I think I'd like to leave it on a positive note like that. I think something Sean said was a very interesting phrase used. I think I've got it right, that we live in the past, complain about the present and fear the future. But I think listening to the contributions we've had today from the floor and from our speakers, there's an awful lot of good things about the future if we grasp them. And particularly, we invite you to take the opportunity to go outside. If you have this on your seat, this will get you into the main hall where the exhibition is going on, and you can see some of the young people who are making their presentations. There also is a ticket for you if you wanted to come back tomorrow, if you have children yourself, if you wanted to bring them along to see what goes on in the exhibition. Well, here is your ticket to do so, so please use it if at all possible. I'd like on your behalf to thank our speakers. I'd like to thank Niall, Sean and Dan for their time and for their very, very interesting thoughts this morning. And on behalf of BT, I'd like to thank you all as well for having taken the time to be with us here this morning. I hope it has been a mind-expanding opportunity in this Mindshare. I hope that you've enjoyed your time. So thank you all very much for taking the time to join us this morning. Goodbye now. Thank you.